The sun beat down on Rattlesnake Gulch, a desolate, forgotten mining settlement in the scorching Arizona desert. Dust devils swirled lazily between the few remaining skeletal structures, a crumbling assay office, a leaning saloon, and a handful of dilapidated cabins. This was Jeremiah Jed Finch's inheritance, a claim he'd traveled 2 months to inspect after his estranged uncle's mysterious death. Jed, a man whose hands were softer from ledger books than pickaxes, felt the oppressive silence keenly. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was an active silence, one that seemed to swallow all noise, even the buzz of flies. Local gossip in the nearest town, Redemption, had been unsettling. Folk spoke of Jed's uncle, Silas, growing peculiar in his final months, muttering about voices in the wind and disappearing trinkets. The sheriff had ruled it a natural death, heatstroke, but the way people avoided Jed's gaze when he mentioned Rattlesnake Gulch told a different story. Jed spent his first few days alone, cleaning out Silas's cabin. He found dusty journals filled with frantic looping handwriting, detailing mining yields that mysteriously plummeted, and cryptic notes about the dust that listens. He dismissed it as an old prospector's madness, but the feeling of being watched, of something else in the silence, began to prickle at him. One sweltering afternoon, Jed was clearing debris from the entrance of the main shaft, a gaping maw in the hillside. The air inside the mine felt unnaturally still, devoid of the usual dampness. As he worked, he noticed something odd. The fine dust that coated everything inside the mine seemed to shift and ripple subtly, even without a breeze. He shook his head, blaming the heat. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper brushed past his ear. It was dry, like rustling paper, and seemed to form no coherent words, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. He spun around, pickaxe raised, but saw nothing but the empty, dust-choked tunnel. He ventured deeper, compelled by an inexplicable curiosity. The deeper he went, the more pronounced the dust's movement became. It wasn't just shifting, it was flowing like a slow, silent river, tracing intricate patterns on the tunnel floor. And the whispers grew louder, clearer, still just dry sounds, but now carrying a distinct, unsettling rhythm. Suddenly, a small, silver locket, one that had belonged to Silas, tumbled from a niche in the rock face, falling onto the dust-covered ground. As it landed, the dust around it reared up, forming a small, swirling vortex that enveloped the locket. The whispers intensified, becoming a chilling, collective sigh. The vortex of dust swirled for a moment, and when it subsided, the locket was gone. Jed scrambled backward, stumbling over loose rocks. This wasn't natural. This wasn't just dust. This was something alive, something that consumed. And it was hungry. He scrambled out of the mine, bursting into the glaring sunlight, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence of Rattlesnake Gulch was no longer empty. It was filled with the knowledge of what lay beneath, waiting. Jedediah Finch spent the rest of the day fortifying Silas's cabin, boarding up windows and barricading the door. He loaded his rifle, though he doubted lead could stop a sentient dust cloud. The journals, once dismissed as ramblings, now seemed terrifyingly lucid. Silas had written of the dust, an ancient desert entity that awoke when disturbed, capable of consuming anything, leaving no trace. It fed on metal, on wood, on memories. The sun set, plunging Rattlesnake Gulch into a chilling darkness that felt far colder than it should. Jed heard no howls, no crickets, only the persistent, oppressive silence, occasionally broken by the faint, dry whispers carried on the wind, seeming to call his name from outside the cabin walls. Around midnight, a terrifying creaking sound started from the outside. Not the wind, but the sound of wood fibers straining. Jed peered through a crack in the boarded window. In the dim moonlight, he saw it. The dust wasn't just inside the mine anymore. It was clinging to the cabin walls, a thick, swirling film that seemed to pulse with an inner light. It was slowly, methodically, eating at the wood, leaving behind a smooth, polished surface where rough timber had been. Panic seized Jed. The dust wasn't just consuming objects, it was consuming the cabin itself. He could hear faint scraping sounds from within the walls now, as if tiny, unseen hands were working to dismantle his only refuge. The whispers, now very clear, seemed to echo from the very dust around him. "Join us, memories, dust." Suddenly, a section of the floorboards near the fireplace collapsed with a soft thump, revealing a gaping hole. From the hole, the dust surged upward like an unholy geyser, forming a swirling column that almost reached the ceiling. Within the column, Jed saw glimpses of fleeting images: a silver locket, a miner's pickaxe, a ghostly flicker of a face. These were the memories, the essence, of what it had consumed. The dust column began to solidify, slowly forming a grotesque, humanoid shape. It was tall and gaunt, its form vaguely resembling a miner, but its surface was composed entirely of swirling, compact dust, studded with tiny, glittering particles of silver and remnants of other objects it had devoured. Where its eyes should have been, two faint, sickly orange glows flickered, staring blankly ahead. It made no sound, no moan. Only the dry, rustling whispers emanated from its form, growing louder, more insistent. It took a slow, deliberate step towards Jed, its dust form shimmering in the dim light. Jed fired his rifle, the shot tearing through its chest, but the dust simply swirled, absorbing the impact, reforming instantly. The orange glows in its eyes brightened momentarily, as if the contact had nourished it. This wasn't a creature of flesh and blood, or even of spirit. It was a being of pure, consuming dust, an ancient hunger that had awakened. And it was now in his home, seeking to add his memories, his very essence, to its monstrous form. Jedediah stumbled backward, his rifle useless against the ever-reforming dust creature. The thing advanced, its silent footsteps marked by the subtle shifting of the dust on the floor. It was a terrifying, deliberate pace, giving him ample time to contemplate his impending doom. The whispers, emanating from the creature itself, now filled the cabin, insidious and seductive. "Give us your stories, your fear." He scrambled towards Silas's workbench, desperately searching for anything that might stop it. His hand landed on a small, sealed tin box, one his uncle had kept hidden. He tore it open, revealing a collection of old glass jars, each filled with various mineral samples. One in particular, a dark, crystalline substance, seemed to hum faintly with a cold, almost electrical energy. Silas's journal mentioned black salt, a rare mineral found only in the deepest veins, said to repel certain unearthly influences. As the dust figure neared, Jed had an idea. He grabbed a handful of the black crystalline dust from the jar, feeling its strange coldness against his skin. He threw it at the approaching entity. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Where the black dust struck the creature, the swirling dust form screamed, a dry, tearing sound that seemed to shred the very air. Its glowing orange eyes dimmed to near darkness, and its humanoid shape convulsed, momentarily breaking apart into a chaotic cloud of dust before reforming. "Black salt!" Jed roared, a desperate hope igniting within him. It didn't destroy it, but it clearly hurt it. The dust creature recoiled, its form less stable, the whispers from its body growing frantic and shrill. It was injured, disrupted. It began to retreat, slowly at first, then flowing rapidly towards the hole it had created in the floor. Jed didn't hesitate. He grabbed the largest jar of black salt, ripping off the lid. He chased the retreating dust form, pouring the dark crystals onto it as it tried to escape back into the earth. Each handful caused it to shriek and contort, delaying its escape. The dust entity plunged back into the hole in the floor, its form shrinking, trying to pull itself back into the depths. But Jed kept pouring, the black salt sparkling like dark diamonds as it cascaded down. The hole itself began to hiss, the raw earth reacting violently to the foreign substance. Jed emptied the jar, then turned and threw the entire tin box into the gaping maw in the floor. A final, desperate scream echoed from below, and then, with a heavy thump, the very earth itself rumbled, and the hole in the floor collapsed inward, sealing itself with a sound of grinding rock. Silence descended once more, but this time it was a profound, natural silence, devoid of the oppressive, watching presence. The whispers were gone. The air felt cleaner, lighter. Jed stood panting, covered in dust, the acrid smell of ozone lingering in the air. He had faced the impossible, the ancient hunger of the dust, and for now he had driven it back. But he knew it wasn't destroyed. The black salt had merely sealed it away, a temporary reprieve. He looked at the sealed floor, then at the scattered pages of Silas's journal. His uncle had battled this thing, and had tried to warn him. He had to learn more, understand what this dust truly was, and how to permanently defeat it. Days turned into a week. Jedediah Finch, fueled by a grim determination, became an obsessed scholar. He devoured Silas's journals, deciphering the frantic scrawl. Silas had discovered the dust deep in the mine, an ancient entity that had lain dormant for centuries. It wasn't merely a monster, it was a living, consuming memory, absorbing the essence of everything it touched, growing more complex and powerful with each absorption. The whispers Jed heard were the echoes of its countless victims. The black salt was its bane, disrupting its cohesive form and pushing it back into dormancy. Jed learned that Silas had made a terrible mistake. He had tried to study the dust, believing it to be a new mineral. He'd brought samples back to his cabin, inadvertently exposing himself to its influence. The dust had slowly consumed his memories, his sanity, leaving him a hollowed shell before finally taking his life. Jed realized his uncle's peculiar behavior and disappearance of items were not madness, but symptoms of the dust's insidious feasting. The mind, Jed knew, was the key. It was the source, the heart of the dust's slumber. He suspected the massive vein of silver Silas had discovered was somehow connected, perhaps acting as a catalyst for the dust's awakening, or even its primary food source. The thought of venturing back into that dark maw filled him with dread, but he knew he had no choice. To truly defeat it, he had to confront it at its source. He gathered his gear, extra jars of black salt he'd found in Silas's hidden stash, a sturdy lantern, a fresh pickaxe, and a coil of rope. He left a note for Sheriff Bart in Redemption, detailing what he'd found, knowing it was likely a futile gesture, but he felt he owed it to his uncle. As he walked towards the mine entrance under the blazing afternoon sun, the air felt thick with a new kind of quiet. Not the oppressive, active silence from before, but a heavy, watchful stillness. The desert seemed to hold its breath. He reached the mine shaft, its opening a black void in the rock. The dust on the ground outside was still, but Jed could feel a faint, cold hum emanating from within. It was the dust, stirring, aware of his presence. He took a deep breath, the metallic scent of minerals and something else, something ancient and dry, filling his nostrils. He lit his lantern, its feeble glow cutting through the oppressive darkness. The entrance was deeper than he remembered, the tunnel twisting sharply downward. As he descended, the air grew colder, and the faint hum intensified, becoming a low, resonant vibration that seemed to travel up through his boots. The dust on the tunnel floor began to shift and ripple again, swirling in faint patterns around his feet. Then, from the darkness ahead, a single clear whisper echoed, distinct and chilling, "Jeremiah!" It was his own name, spoken with a dry, rustling sound that seemed to resonate within his very skull. It was Silas's voice, ancient and distorted, an echo of a life consumed. Jed froze, his blood running cold. The dust remembered. It remembered its victims. It was waiting. He clutched the jar of black salt tighter, and pushed forward into the suffocating darkness, deeper into the heart of the whispering terror. The deeper Jedediah ventured into the Black Gulch mine, the more intense the dust's presence became. The air was thick with the cold hum, a low vibration that thrummed in his bones, making his teeth ache. The whispers were constant now, a cacophony of dry, rustling sounds, occasionally punctuated by fragmented, spectral voices that seemed to be pulled from a forgotten past. The frantic pleas of vanished miners, the mournful sighs of trapped prospectors, even the faint, distorted laughter of children from long-lost settlements. This was the library of souls Silas had hinted at, a horrifying collection of absorbed memories. The dust on the tunnel floor was a living current, flowing around his boots, sometimes rearing up into small, swirling tendrils that tried to brush against his skin. He kept a jar of black salt open, sprinkling it around him as he walked. Where the black salt landed, the dust recoiled, hissed faintly, and left a small, clear patch on the ground. He followed Silas's crude maps, deep into the labyrinthine tunnels. The walls here were different, streaked with gleaming veins of pure silver or sparkling in the lantern light. This was it, the new vein that had awakened the dust. He realized the dust wasn't just feeding on memories. It seemed to be drawn to the silver, perhaps even growing from it. Then, he heard it. A rhythmic thump, 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 from ahead, accompanied by a low, guttural groaning. It was the sound of the dust consolidating, forming one of its terrifying figures. He rounded a bend in the tunnel and stopped dead. Before him was a vast, open cavern, its ceiling lost in shadow. And in the center, towering almost to the ceiling, stood the colossal figure of dust. It was far larger than the one he'd faced in the cabin, its form more solidified, studded with even more glittering silver fragments. Its glowing orange eyes pulsed with a malevolent brilliance, and from its wide, lipless maw, a continuous, dry, agonized moan emanated, filled with an ancient, insatiable hunger. Around its feet, swirling into its base, was an immense lake of fine, silvery dust, pulsing and shifting. It was the accumulated mass of all it had consumed, a vast, silent graveyard of stolen essences. And from the shimmering surface of this lake, smaller, translucent tendrils of dust writhed, reaching up towards the creature's towering form, feeding into it. The entity turned its head, its glowing eyes fixing on Jed. The humming in the cavern intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The myriad whispers in the air coalesced, forming a single chilling voice that resonated directly in his mind, clear as if spoken, "Mine!" It was the voice of the dust, ancient and possessive. Jed gripped his pickaxe, its steel head gleaming. He had to stop it. Not just for himself, but for the countless souls consumed, for Silas, for the very memory of Rattlesnake Gulch. He didn't know how, but he knew he couldn't let it grow any larger. He had to destroy its source, or risk it consuming everything. His eyes darted around the cavern, desperately searching for a weakness, an idea. He noticed the huge vein of silver ore running along the cavern walls, feeding into the lake of dust. That was it. The source. With a desperate cry, Jed lunged forward, not at the creature, but at the enormous silver vein embedded in the cavern wall. He raised his pickaxe, aiming to shatter the ore, hoping to sever the connection between the dust and its power. Jedediah's pickaxe struck the immense silver vein with a resounding crack, the sound echoing through the cavern. The impact sent vibrations through the rock, and a shower of glittering silver shards erupted from the wall. The towering dust creature shrieked, a dry, tearing sound of pure rage and pain. Its glowing orange eyes flared, and it lunged at Jed, its massive clawed hand sweeping towards him with terrifying speed. The humming reached a fever pitch, and the whispers became a cacophony of enraged, tormented voices. Jed threw himself to the side, narrowly avoiding the swipe that would have disintegrated him. He scrambled back to the vein, ignoring the dust creature's relentless advance, and brought the pickaxe down again, and again, aiming for the heart of the gleaming ore. Each strike sent tremors through the cavern, and with each blow, the dust creature screamed, its form flickering violently, as if its very essence was being torn. The silver lake at its base began to recede, shrinking rapidly, and the smaller tendrils of dust feeding into the creature withered and vanished. Jed realized his gamble had paid off. The silver was its lifeblood, its connection to this plane. With a final, desperate swing, Jed's pickaxe found a fault line in the massive vein. A deep, guttural groan emanated from the very rock of the cavern, and with a thunderous crack, a colossal section of the silver vein split apart, crumbling inward. The effect on the dust creature was immediate and catastrophic. Its towering form shuddered violently, the glowing orange eyes exploding into a shower of sparks that dissolved into nothingness. The massive dust body began to disintegrate rapidly, swirling into a chaotic vortex, no longer controlled, no longer cohesive. It wasn't just crumbling, it was being torn apart by an unseen force. The whispers rose to a final, collective scream of agony and loss, 1,000 voices of the consumed crying out in unison as their essence was ripped asunder. Then, with a final, overwhelming whoosh, the dust, the entity, the accumulated memories of centuries, was violently expelled from the cavern. It didn't just vanish. It was blown away by an unseen gale, a powerful, cleansing wind that roared through the cavern, rushing up the mine shaft and out into the desert sky. Jed stood gasping, leaning against the now shattered silver vein, watching the last of the dust disappear up the tunnel. The cavern was silent, truly silent, for the first time in centuries. The oppressive hum was gone. The chilling whispers had vanished. The air, though dusty from the explosion, felt clear, almost clean. He climbed out of the mine, emerging into the crisp desert night. The sky was filled with stars, brighter than he had ever seen them. The wind blew, but it was a natural wind, carrying the scent of sagebrush and clean earth. There was no silence now, only the gentle chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Jed returned to Silas's cabin, exhausted but alive. He looked at the journals, now just a collection of paper. The horrors they contained were real, but the threat was gone. Rattlesnake Gulch was just a desolate mining settlement again. He stayed long enough to gather Silas's few remaining personal effects and leave a marker for his uncle's grave. He knew no one would ever mine silver from Black Gulch again. It was a place of ghosts, not of the spectral kind, but of the memories of lives consumed by an ancient hunger. As Jed rode away from Rattlesnake Gulch, heading towards a new life, he looked back at the mine entrance, a dark, gaping maw in the moonlight. The dust of the desert was just dust again, carried by the wind. But sometimes, when a dust devil spun across the plains, he would swear he could hear a faint, almost imperceptible whisper carried on the breeze, a dry, rustling reminder of the ancient horror he had faced, and the peace he had brought back to the land.